Bruno Mwemba is my name, and I represent an organization or project called the Biodiversity Finance Initiative. This is the UNDP project headquartered in Istanbul. And I think we're running now in about 40 countries. What are we doing in Zambia? I think from now up to 2025, our focus is actually mainstreaming green finance into the financial sector. So that's the stuff I think that the central bank governor was actually talking about. We've been supporting the development of Zambia's green bond market. I think we have some successes, already green bond, guidelines, listing rules, gazetted. Now we're moving on to support the development of Zambia's green finance policy for the entire financial sector. So that's the banking sector, the capital markets, and also the pensions and insurance. And then we'll also be supporting the development of the tagging or reporting system for the financial sector. So that's what we're doing. What I'll do now is just to request that each of the panelists introduce themselves.
Thank you, Bruno, and it is a pleasure to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Prudence Mchinota. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for Community Markets for Conservation, an institution that's working with smallholder farmers to build capacity and improve livelihoods for many of the rural farmers working in marginalized areas, practicing conservation agriculture, smart agriculture, and trying to prevent them from destroying our wildlife and soils. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anachila Lankombo. I work for the Worldwide Fund for Nature in Zambia as the country director. For those that may not be familiar with WWF, we are the world's largest nature conservation organization. Our mission is to stop the degradation of the natural environment so as to ensure that we can have these natural resources available for us today and for future generations. So we run a number of projects and investments that relate to, but not limited to, the restoration of forests and wildlife across different ecosystems in Zambia. We also work on freshwater resources. We monitor the risks that our rivers and wetlands face, and also work with government to help and strengthen the policy and governance arrangements. We work with a number of communities also to strengthen their livelihoods and promote more sustainable ways of living or agriculture and production. And lastly, but not the least, we've been working increasingly how we can support Zambia green the economy and develop a number of finance-related products that will deliver a return for the economy, a return for nature, a return for businesses and people. Climate change has been one of the biggest challenges of our time, one of the biggest environmental issues. So part of our agenda has to look at how can we support ecosystems, how can we support communities and businesses adapt to the threat of climate change. A bit of what we have done in that respect.
Good afternoon. My name is Samuel Walia. I'm the Managing Director at the Development Bank of Zambia. And of course, our mandate is a bit broad, but principally what we do is to structure development financing, for the private sector, and to some extent for partnerships between the private sector and the public sector, where there are PPP arrangements and stuff like that. So how are we different from the commercial banks? I think our tagline is that our financing arrangements should generate a development impact. So ideally, we look at financing businesses, especially the SMEs, especially those that cannot actually access funds from commercial banks by their very nature. We are looking at scaling up actual financing for startups as well as for innovators as well. Our measure of success is in terms of the development impacts that we are able to generate. And in this particular context, we are seizing up opportunities to help the country mobilize finances, especially climate finance, to finance some of the green projects in the country. So I'll be able to talk more about what we are doing at DBZ, slightly different from what I've done in the past, especially in the area of climate finance. Thank you.
Okay, great. Perhaps I can actually start with you, Nachilala. I think there's a buzzword around nature-based, solutions. Just give us some kind of nature-based solutions 101. What's this, and what are you doing as WWF in that space? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So one-on-one on nature-based solution. Nature-based solution is a term, as Bruno has said, that's gaining traction. That is looking at types of investments that are done to either protect, restore, or manage natural or modified ecosystems that deliver services. These services could include land resources. These services could include water, fisheries, and a raft of natural resources. And so the whole idea of nature-based systems is not only to protect and restore nature, but also to use them to solve societal problems. In this case, the problems that come with climate change. So the problems around droughts, the problems around flooding. Some nature-based solutions are delivered to look to nature to solve, for example, some health problems. When you look at agriculture, for example, or conservation agriculture, there are natural methods that are used to deal with soil fertility. There are natural methods that are used to deal with, say, for example, the problem of pesticides. So when this is done at a large scale, and normally at an ecosystem or landscape-based level, it is referred to as a nature-based solution. So it's not just conservation for its sake, it's conservation to protect this resource because it delivers value, and it's a way in which that value is maintained, but also it's interventions that are targeted to resolve a societal problem. Like I said, it could be water insecurity, it could be food insecurity, it could be health security as we are facing right now with COVID-19.
Okay, great. That's a good rundown of what nature-based solutions are. Let me turn to Dr. Walia, DBZ. I think recently you just got your accreditation with the Green Climate Fund. I think that's the huge milestone for which you actually need to be congratulated, I think. But again, that's just one huge milestone. I think the next milestone that we're actually looking at as a country is to actually begin to see the money flowing from the GCF. So from the time that we got this accreditation as Zambia through you, DBZ, just give us a timeline lowdown of what exactly have you been doing towards accessing our maiden resources from the GCF, and what kind of ticket sizes are we looking at, and in what kind of interventions? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes. I think DBZ has been working in the background, for some time, trying to gain the accreditation to the GCF, which is the Green Climate Fund. It's a process of a lot of documentation, assurance and things like that. And in July 2021 this year, the board was able to accredit DBZ as a direct access entity to the GCF funds. It makes DBZ perhaps the second development finance institution in Southern Africa to be accredited after the South African Development Bank. So it's an envious accreditation. And what that means is that DBZ now is able to receive and process proposals that then we can submit to GCF for funding. Now, we are accredited for ticket sizes of about $250 million. Meaning that the private sector can now work with us to develop these climate projects, so green projects, bring them to DBZ. We'll run through those. And once we are satisfied that all the requirements have been satisfied, then we'll be able to take those projects and submit them on behalf of our clients to the Green Climate Fund for funding. Now, of course, the process of funding, there is a criteria by the GCF that has to be followed in order to access those funds. So what we are now doing as DBZ is to begin to build a pipeline of projects that can then be financed by the GCF. Some of them, of course, will be smaller ticket sizes, and of course, some of them will be bigger ticket sizes. The critical advantage we have as DBZ is that we are able then, as a financial institution, to blend in grant financing for the GCF together with credit financing in financing a specific project. We are also able to provide a concept note, and then we begin to look at the grant proposal. Now, the grant proposal for GCF tends to be quite detailed. So in terms of feasible timelines, we are talking about a project you initiate today. You have to give it about 12 months minimum, 12 and maybe 1.5 years minimum before you can actually get the funds into the project. So what we are doing now is that we are reaching out to our clients, engaging some private sector individual within the ecosystem, especially on the energy side, and solicit for a mix of large and small projects. Some of them predominantly on the mitigation side, renewable energy, projects, but we are also looking at some which are purely on adaptation, working with some of the UN agencies to develop those concepts and begin to submit them. So what I can say is this is a huge opportunity, but we also want to inform the private sector that the success actually comes from them. We do have an access entity that you can utilize as DP8, but they invest more time in actually building up these ideas, building up robust projects and proposals that then we can work together on and get them submitted to the GCF. The advantage, the critical advantage, goes beyond the private sector. Because you can imagine if we were able to mobilize $150 million, 2 projects, $500,000, $500 million in 2 projects, and that money comes into the country through DBZ. I mean, the impact on the economy is quite visible. So we are very excited to begin to work on these projects with the private sector.
Okay, thank you for that elaborate, appreciation, I think, of what you're doing towards accessing, funds from the GCF. Prudence, it's wild. I think that's something that always greets us when we get into, some of these change those. For someone who's getting in contact with Komako for the first time, just give us a snippet of what are you doing, especially towards conservation of biodiversity, climate change. How does your business model help in terms of conservation and also climate change?
So with Komako, these days our tagline is we are making conservation profitable. And the way we're doing that is we identified the problems that many of our farmers were facing. We identified the damage that was happening to our ecosystem, to our land, to our environment. And where Komako came in was also realizing the gap that's there between most of the investors, most of the financial institutions, and what they are willing and the level of risk they are willing to take to support rural communities. And that is one of the greatest challenges that still exists now. So a financial institution is willing to work with the likes of Komako because it's a well-structured institution, but cannot take on the risk to support the farmer because either they do not meet the credit rating or they do not have any assets or any collateral to match what the financial institutions are offering. Komako went into the communities through the chiefdoms and various communities that we are working with. We developed farmer groups, we developed cooperatives, and through those, we already identified that these people have the ability to take on and deal with the challenges that are around their communities, but they just needed somebody that can trust and somebody that can empower them. So we have poachers and we're working with various illegal poachers, encouraging them to hand over their firearms. But for you to do that, you need to provide an alternative source of livelihood. And that's where the agricultural side of things came in. We are working with various farmers to practice conservation agriculture, smart agricultural methods. And that's not an easy task because being a business that's running, you need support. This is a subsidized kind of service, and we've worked with various partners. Most of them, I'm sure, are in this room. We've worked with the UN, USA, GIZ, just to name a few, who have provided grant funding for us to be able to train and walk the journey with the farmers that we are working with. And when we got to that level, you're realizing, okay, now the farmer has enough to feed their families. What is the next stage of their development so that they do not go back to those illegal methods of earning income? So Komako then came through its wild brand, started creating markets where Komako acts as the partner that does the offtake of the produce. So we are buying from our farmers various type of products, maize, soybeans, and we do actually focus mostly on legumes because of the benefits of legumes to the soil. When we provide the markets, Komako has manufacturing processing plants in the Eastern Province, in the Western Province, and we're just approaching the Mumbai-Teji area as well. And there we actually then produce peanut butter. Most of you that have tasted the It's Wild range of peanut butter, It's Wild honey, and all the range of products. And we provide markets for these farmers, value add to all the products that the farmers are producing. And that's where Komako comes in. So it's a whole value chain of trying to mitigate the gaps that are there in not just preserving our environments, but also ensuring that this is a continual process.
Thank you. Wonderful. Back to Nachilala. WWF, you're actually managing a pot of funds called the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development, DFCD. People want money. How's that fund going? In Zambia, do we have traction? Yeah. Any issues? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. So for the last 2 years, we have been running a fund called the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. It is a fund that is as a result of a collaboration between WWF, SNV, the Dutch Development Bank, and also the climate fund managers of the Netherlands. And the objective of this fund is to support businesses that are impacted by climate change in a country such as ours, to support them make the transition in terms of the production methods for perhaps a more unsustainable ways of producing to more sustainable ways of producing, where they're also able to adapt and make adjustments to the impacts of climate change. So for example, if you take businesses that are into agriculture, when there is a drought that happens, there's an impact that's related to insufficient water. So what this fund does and what it has done for some of the projects that have come to us so far has been to look at how we support them to transition from their flooding irrigation methods to more drip irrigation, which demands less water. So which means in a season when the country has less water, the business can still run. There's still business sustainability that goes on. So far in our pipeline that we've developed over the last 2 years, we have 40 projects that have applied for funding from different sectors, from forestry sector, agriculture sector, energy sector, to mention about a few. Of those 40 projects, only 2 of them have gotten to investment stage. And basically the issues are around, number one, on ticket size. The Dutch Fund is looking for projects that are looking for financing for growth that will also help them adapt, that is at the size of $4 million or up. So you find that most of our businesses in Zambia are smaller, and they may not have the absorptive capacity to take in that. Secondly, we know that to be able to have the technical capacities to build in green standards in production is a bit of a challenge, even to do the assessments in terms of how green a business is and the specific transitions or changes it needs to make. So the origination facility provides grants to these businesses or projects that have viability for them to make the transition, or at least for them to be able to access these 4 million plus, but in helping them to create business plans, to establish their bankability, so that again they're shared onwards to the network of partners that WWF has to enable the actual investment funding to come. So as an office, we have a team that looks at the various projects and that gives advice to companies that have applied for this funding. The other perhaps issue that has been there is that the learning curve has been a bit, even for the projects that are eligible, has been a bit longer. And I think as we gain more experience in terms of how to prepare these projects, and as we share expertise with other financial institutions that have already gone in this sort of direction. We're finding a way of moving a little bit faster. To deal with the problem of ticket size, as WWF, again, we have partnered with Sanaco to look at how we can develop a range of green finance instruments that will look at the smaller businesses. So far, we have connected with Kukula Capital, which is looking at a particular ticket size between $500,000 to about $2 million. We think it still leaves out a lot of businesses. So we are also looking at a product that's looking at early stage businesses and maybe the smaller end of the businesses, because we think that that's the group, that's the majority in Zambia, and are also more severely impacted by climate change. Yeah.
Great. Dr. Warrior, I think within the green finance space, in terms of the different finance solutions and instruments, I think green bonds seems to be one of those buzz instruments that has actually come up. Like I indicated, I've been working in that space. I think we played a bit of background to that. We have the green bond guidelines, listing rules. We've been working on incentives, but yet we are yet to record a maiden green bond. I think it would be interesting to hear from DBZ what your views are on how we can actually gain a lot more momentum on green bonds. Are you looking at participating? Obviously, I think we saw the Minister of Finance in the 2022 national budget indicating that this is one instrument that they would be willing to support. So just your views on how you think we can actually gain a lot more traction, I think, in this instrument. Thank you.
Okay, it's a good area, for financing a number of projects. As you know, you could actually raise financing for on the credit side, but I think if you go into the equity market, capital markets, the opportunities are much larger there, because now you're looking beyond the country. You can actually go outside and solicit for to invest in those bonds. There are more resources outside the country to finance those green bond projects than there are locally. So I think the idea is, how do you then work through, to position the country to be able to attract those funds? I think the first thing is that you need to look at the regulatory framework. It must be enabling to attract green projects for funding through the capital markets. Now, what you realize also is that most of the green projects, they talk about mitigation projects. Some of them have a long gestation period. Others are also sensitive in nature. So if you look at these projects purely from the financial lens, that we normally use for other projects, they don't become bankable. So then you need participation of anchor investors, to make these projects viable and make it even easier for others to come on board. And that's where the development bank comes in. So if there is a solicitation or an issuance of a green bond, the mere fact that the government is going to participate in putting resources into that bond will basically de-risk that bond, and you can attract more from outside. The mere fact that DBZ comes in, to back the process of issuing that bond, or even participating by putting money into that bond, will basically de-risk a lot of private sector players, to come on board. So the most important first is to say, is there any awareness that people can actually mobilize capital, through the issuance of green bonds? Do we have an enabling legislation in the country that is robust enough to allow those funds to flow into? How about the security of return, from those bonds? So I think we are at a time when we can build better, because we are starting to participate in this era of bonds, green bonds. We can learn from what others have done. I think there have been successful bonds in Africa that have been issued. But I think the most important is to see, let's all be partners into that than thinking that a particular institution can actually play it out to mobilize those funds. So we as DBZ, we are keen. We are actually building up a dedicated unit within DBZ, which we are calling a climate finance unit, which will be dedicated purely to mobilize resources, climate fund resources, to support things like issue of green bonds, but also to de-risk some of these projects before they can even go into getting financing from the bond. So there is a bit we are doing. We're also building capacity, not only for us, but also for some of our state actors, in getting to understand that the financing mechanisms that are international can be localized, helping to develop frameworks that are a best practice in nature. Bring local authorities, for instance, into the play. You know, they look small when they work alone, but if you can bring them together and issue maybe a green bond for local authorities, I mean, a huge opportunity for people to participate because of the impact. We're talking about impact investment, not only on the environment, but also social impact and things like that. So we are ready to participate.
Okay, okay, great. Prudence, I think in your Komako model, if there are those that would want to kind of replicate, you know, that model, obviously to augment what you're doing, just give us a bit of a snippet of some of the issues that you've gone through, which you think needs to be fixed, so that we kind of improve the operations of a model like yours, especially that which feeds into you know, climate change, you know, mitigation, adaptation, and also conservation. Any issues that you've you know, faced that you think needs to be fixed to also accommodate, I think, others, you know, to come into your space?
What I can say is that Komako has been operating for 19 years and we still haven't gotten it right. But I can tell you and assure you that we're on the right path. And we would like to have more Komakos out there because we've come to realize that is the only way we can reach out to our rural communities and provide similar benefits that most of the entrepreneurs and most of the farmers that are around the urban centers actually receive. Now, some of the challenges that we've had to go through, obviously financing being one of the greatest challenges. There are a lot of operations in our model that need a great deal of subsidy. And we have been fortunate to receive grant funding. But what I can advise you is in a year, we probably write not less than 50 proposals. That's at least an average of 3-4 proposals a month. And not all of them have been successful because not everyone has the confidence or is willing to take on the risk of channeling the funds through such a model. But it is the future and it is the solution that we need. So financing is one great challenge that we've had, and it's quite exciting that we are beginning to see more financial institutions, impact investors, coming to appreciate that for us to tackle the challenges of climate change, this is the way to go. Some of the greatest challenges that you also face is when it comes to markets. You try and sell the produce that we've purchased from the farmers, you'll find that most of the retailers are expecting, for an example, similar size of beans. That's impossible. You're buying from a great number of farmers. So you're going to have different varieties, you're going to have different size of the grain that's coming out of the field. And for me, what that reflects is that's a natural product. So that kind of awareness, and for people to appreciate that if you want to eat healthy, if you want to eat natural, if you want to support the communities, you need to start thinking outside the box. If you're going to find the same grain kind of a commodity, then that's highly likely that's a genetically modified product. That's the other challenge that we face. And then, as I spoke about making conservation profitable, we know that most of the markets, for us to actually attain the revenues that we are looking at or the turnover that we are looking at, you need to have premium markets. Locally, we're not at that level, so you need to export. There's so many challenges that we are facing. Right now, I can give an example that we can't take our honey to South Africa. And it's been going on for a year. There are certain bans that are there. It's not just the South African market. When you want to export even to Europe, there are so many retailers that love the story and that want to support the smallholder farmers, but we can't get our product there. It's either most of the retailers, suppliers that are doing that through illegal means, and you can't do that when you have a mission that you want to uphold. So does somebody come to invest in robust labs? And do we have local labs that can actually match the standards that are expected when you want to export? So these are some of the challenges that we actually face along the value chain. And they can be worked on. There's policy, there are different measures, partnerships that can be created, but it does take time. And maybe one last thing that I would mention is when you want to adopt such a model, you need to acknowledge the traditions and the values and the ways that people in a certain community, you need to make them own the project itself. You cannot come up with measures that you want to implement in a different project and take them to a different center. We are operating in Mumbo and Iteji now, and we started last year. We're beginning to realize that the way we did things in the Eastern Province is definitely different. So you need to appreciate the cultures and the traditions in the different areas that you're operating, because it is the communities that actually get to own and achieve success around this model.
Great, thank you. So what I want to do is get some questions, I think, from the audience, including the virtual audience. But in the meantime, for my panelists, begin to think about some of your final, thoughts as we get the questions from the audience.
Hi, can you hear me? Nina Gibson from Farm Depot. I've got a question for you, Prudence. When do you think your projects will be self-sustaining? I mean, it's all grant money is fantastic, blended finance is fantastic. What are your objectives and timelines in terms of making projects actually self-sustainable?
When will our projects be sustainable? I think one of the greatest challenges that I mentioned earlier is the issue of markets, is the issue of quality. And Komako will come in, build capacity, training. Our cooperatives in the Eastern Province, where we started off, are capable of running the projects. But the challenges that we have is we need to build stability in terms of revenue earning capacity. And that's where the greatest challenge is. When traders go to buy from our farmers, they are moving into purchasing from our farmers, and they're not really paying what matches, the markets. Komako goes in and buys at a premium price, but we can only do that to a certain limitation. From a business perspective, we try to work sustainability within our business and trying to see what is it that we need to do and what improvements do we need to tackle. And most of where our costs are centered are supporting the farmers paying premium prices, having to borrow expensive capital so that we can support conservation through the model. And that's where the sustainability gap comes in. So if we're looking at what stage are we going to achieve sustainability, it is at that stage when our markets are ready to pay premium pricing for the work that the farmers are doing, the produce that they are giving out, or the produce that they have, and at a time when the policy becomes fair, not just to urban producers, but also to the rural communities.
Great. My name is Mainza Mwene from Komako. In your presentation, actually, you mentioned that you currently have 42 projects, and out of the 42, only 2 have reached the investment stage. My question is, what are some of the challenges that you've observed from the 40 that haven't reached that stage in this area? Thanks.
Yeah, what's happening to the rest of the projects? Just to say that there are 3 main criteria that all projects that are funded or assisted have to meet. So the project proposal must demonstrate an outcome that is commercially viable so that it can sustain itself. It must demonstrate an outcome that is with some social outcomes. It could be green jobs. And then thirdly, there has to be recordable environmental outcomes or adaptation outcomes. So different projects are able to meet these criteria in different ways. The biggest problem has been around ticket size. As I mentioned, the project, the fund is looking for bigger projects. So perhaps I should use this opportunity to market the facility to large businesses that are looking to making transitions and ensuring that their businesses are more environmentally responsible and also are more climate resilient, to come and talk to us to see what it is that we can do to support them make the changes internally. These businesses could also play the role of being an anchor investee, where they could be connected perhaps to an outgrower or another group of producers that are part of the ecosystem or the catchment where they are working. The third issue sometimes we have is incomplete data. So not because a project is not, doesn't have environmental outcomes or commercial outcomes. When the data is not enough, it's difficult
to progress the project from one level to the next. What does this mean? It speaks to the capacities in the organizations or the companies that apply. And it's a good thing that if there's a way in which we can connect with DBZ, because they're doing a lot of capacity building, there's a lot in which companies that are benefiting from their capacity building would gain in terms of preparing them also to be investment ready under DFCD. Thank you.
Great.
Hi, my name is Mia Wabumba, and my question goes to the Zambian Development Bank. I want to find out what programs or how accessible are your services to the Zambian youths, since the African youths have been finding challenges to have access to finance. Are there programs like trainings or orientation to show the youths how they can write these project proposals in line with the funding requirement?
DBZ by its very nature provides solutions to registered enterprises, not individual youth. So the first thing that the young people should do is to register a company or an enterprise. Then through that, we can engage with them and support them. In fact, what we are doing right now, unlike what happened in the past, was that there hasn't been a dedicated focus on the young people in terms of supporting them. So they are actually lumped in the same basket with the small, medium, and more organized firms. We are discussing the Ministry for Small and Medium Enterprises, as well as the Ministry of Commerce currently, and a few other stakeholders to set up a dedicated support structure or system within the bank for the young people. So through that, then we'll be able to provide with them the technical support as to how do you prepare a bankable business proposal, and how do we do appraisal systems to appraise your projects that can anticipate what they need to work on and build a capacity. I must mention that providing technical capacity building is a mandate of DBZ. So apart from providing credit, equity, and all other things that are in the mandate, one of the key mandates is to provide technical advisory services, both to the private sector, but also to government. So if there are young people that you have that would like to actually benefit from these services, you can just contact me after the meeting. I'll be able to link you up for that advice.
Okay, thank you. As part of this wrap up, 1 minute each. What are your concluding thoughts? We could actually just start from you, Dr. Wali, and then we go in that direction.
Okay, thank you very much. I know it's a minute, so I won't elaborate much. I think that Zambia is at a tipping point in terms of getting into climate finance and mobilizing resources for development. And I think that the environment for Zambia is ripe for us to move in that area. So as a development bank, I think our interest in terms of partnerships is to say, can we actually look at the green finance projects themselves and see the challenges that they do face? Quite frankly, if you hope that you have a green project that will be financed purely from the commercial window, it may not be sustainable. So as a development bank, I think our role is to come in and get that environmental risk component of the project and see if we can provide adequate financing to it, which will be concessional in view of the development impact. So we provide the credit lines dedicated to the climate finance unit. The second is that if the liquidity in the financial sector to fund these projects is available, commercial banks and others, what will be missing then is who is going to de-risk these projects. I think most of the projects fail to get financing because of the risk. They are perceived to be high risk. Environmental projects generally are high risk projects. So what we are preparing, working with NABI, is to set up a credit guarantee scheme that will have a dedicated window for de-risking green projects. And I think that's a very important aspect. I think the third and last point I want to raise on this is that some of these green projects, because of their very nature, they impact the environment that we all benefit from. They have social impact, but also they have a commercial return. The funding streams or instruments needed to fund those projects tend to be blended. So as a bank, we are building a lot of capacity in-house, work with our partners to go into blended financing to support these projects. And lastly, but on the list, is to look at the opportunity for us to syndicate. So DBZ does not need to be the only funding agency or institution to fund a green project because our mandates are different. So those that are predominantly trying to promote conservation by its very nature, they can put in a grant instrument. And then once that is done, we can also put in a credit instrument or de-risking instrument. By so doing, you make that particular project, viable. So I think those four that I've mentioned tend to be the most important mechanism we want to utilize to promote green financing.
Great. Nachi?
Thank you so much. I think the first point for us to recognize is that our economy is largely dependent on natural resources. So we need to develop a conceptualization in our economic policy on the value of our natural capital. I know you've given me 1 minute, but I just want to give an illustration. As WWF, we are working on the conservation of the Lukanga swamps. Why are we working on that? Because it's key for national energy and water security. It's a key wetland whose storage capacity of water is equal to 2 man-made dams, namely Akakafue and Iteji combined. So if we lose that ecosystem, we'll have threats, including in the generation of hydropower through these dams. So I think the first takeaway message that I'd like us to leave is, how do we transform our economic policy so that it reflects the true value of nature? Secondly, I also want to say that we have a huge potential to be Africa's biggest destination for green finance. What do we need to do? We need to make sure that we create a robust ecosystem of actors working together to develop the capacity to create these large-scale projects that can help deliver green bonds, that can help to deliver sustainability linked bonds or other financial instruments that are looking for big projects. We've learned from DFCD that the money is there. If the projects are small, the money will not come to us. Lastly, but not the least, I also just wanted to mention that there's a lot of learnings that is available within this country and across the globe that we can draw to for us to quickly build this capacity, for us to make Zambia the #1 destination for green and climate finance. Thank you.
Great. Prudence?
Well, Nachilala's second point would have been my first. And thank you for that. We need to harness on the partnerships that do exist, and we need to do it locally. The global world actually believes that we can be, one of the biggest countries that can contribute to mitigating climate change. And the challenges that we all talk about do have solutions. You find that when you're talking about green projects, we've got so much funding that's going to support maybe a car wash project that's doing it in a smart way. We've got technology being supported for somebody that's developing an app to support mobile payments around the rural communities, but the rural communities are not receiving that benefit. The rural communities are not getting that capacity building they need. And I think that's my biggest plea to all of us in the room, that let's harness the partnerships and let's build solutions. Let's create solutions that actually work for us. For us to attract that level of finance, we cannot be talking about the credit risk that exists with rural communities. We cannot be talking about the challenges that exist with communities. Let's find solutions. Do we need to create groups? Do we need to create smaller institutions around the rural communities? Otherwise, we are going to attract so much funding and it will just be received by many of us that are in this room, the institutions that are around urban centers, and we will not grow together with our rural communities. We had a joke just before this session and we were saying at times there's so much funding that we don't know what to do with it. And it is our responsibility to ensure that as we grow, as we build our economy, let's not center it around ourselves, but let's come together with our rural communities.
All right, so I think it's been exciting. It's always good to, I think, moderate a session with your panelists. This, exciting. I think one issue is that I look forward to actually begin to see fruition, I think across different, green instruments that we're working on, be it green bonds, and hopefully we can also see the likes of debt for nature swaps, coming into play. I know the Minister of Finance did mention that, I think in the 2022 national budget. So hopefully if we have a similar, summit next year, we should be talking about the results. So I'm quite expectant of that. So this has been yours truly, Bruno Mwemba, on behalf of this exciting, panel. Thank you so much.